Hey everyone, welcome to the TEDxAlexanderPark live stream show. So excited to talk with my guest Stephen today. Um, he was one of our applicants this year for our event and just found his mission and just his overall beingness to be incredibly bright and brilliant, and wanted to bring him on live to share with you today. For those of you who have not heard yet, our event will take place on February 25th, 2023. You can head over to TEDxAlexanderPark.com. I'll put it on the screen here for you. And our theme this year is Back to the Basics. It's based upon the movie The Lorax, where we've seen that the planet was destroyed based on trying to profit over the planet with callousness to what was happening to the lives around us. And the way that they ended up solving that was by replanting the truffle seed, is getting back to the basics of taking care of the planet, of being kind and considerate. They say the old saying that they used to tell us in grade school of treat others as you want to be treated. And what we're looking for our speakers, and also just ideas for our community, is those that are simple to implement, those that can affect our everyday lives, those that we can embrace as a community to see the ripple effect of that action make an impact in our communities. And so our good friend Stephen today has such a a wealth of experience and background. I mean, he spent times with monks. He's studied some major world religions. He's had transformative experiences throughout his career, and he hosts amazing workshops to help you really work through those mental blocks, to elevate your mindset, and to do much more than that. So, Stephen, my friend, why don't you go ahead and let the audience know a little bit about your journey, and then we'll dive deep into some of those amazing stories.
My journey. Well, it's been a bit erratic, I suppose. I'm going to start with my parents because they sort of unknowingly set me off in a certain direction. They were circus performers. My dad was a lion tamer. My mother was an acrobatic dancer. They met in the circus just before the war, which meant that my dad was arrested because he was Italian. They were in England. They threw him in jail. And so lots of stories there. And I was born after that, so I never knew them in the circus. But I had all these stories and all these pictures, and it just, I expected my life to be something as dramatic as that. And you got to be careful what you wish for, right? But that's sort of what happened. I mean, there was a lot of drama in my own life. I ended up becoming a Buddhist monk, and then leaving Buddhism to continue my studies of the Buddha, but by myself. I've always had this problem fitting in. I've always had a problem with institutions, and I've always had this sort of conflict, not a conflict, but a tension between understanding established wisdom and using my own brain, you know? And I think because I've always had this spiritual sort of drive, and I think at the core of it is the sense that, you know, if I've got a brain, if God gave me a brain or whatever, wherever it came, surely it should be used. Shouldn't this be my preferred source of information?
Right.
You know? So that sort of brought me into conflict with the whole idea of beliefs and belief systems. And that's really where my talk is going to be going into the nature of not what we believe in. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying you should believe this and not that. I'm interested in looking at how we believe, what we use our beliefs for, and how we can use them to get back to the basics that I'm thinking of here are very, very fundamental social basics like decency, honesty, integrity, all these old-fashioned words, you know. We need them back.
We do. We do.
So that's sort of a very brief synopsis of my journey. Yeah.
Wow. You talked about how we believe. I'd love for you to go into that a little bit more. How is it that you help people examine that and grow in that?
Well, there are all sorts of beliefs. You can believe in God, which is something that you can't really prove or disprove. but there are other beliefs which we carry around with us, which are more subtle, such as self-limiting beliefs, such as I'm not good enough, or I'm not intelligent enough. That was my particular thing that I grew up with. I was taught that I wasn't intelligent, and so that's why I went to the other extreme and studied like crazy, I guess. But I think I've lost the thread of my
We're
answer.
talking about how you believe, how you help people.
How you believe. So
Yeah.
there are ways of believing. This is what I learned in Buddhism, that a belief is something temporary. Okay, so the Buddha says life is suffering. So you don't just swallow that. You sort of put it up as it's a hypothesis. Okay, so we're going to check that out and see how that works. So then we use that belief as a reference point to see, well, how does that relate to my life, and how does that relate to life in general? So that's using our brains. That's bringing our own intelligence into it, and that's what is so important. That's what means so much to me, is to bring our own intelligence into things instead of just accepting. And the way most people swallow their beliefs, well, that's what they do. They swallow them. They don't think about them. And I was raised as a Catholic, and I was encouraged to not think about them. I was punished for thinking about them, for calling them into question. And I think this has become a big bottleneck, a sort of a sticking point in our culture. And we need to break through it. And I don't think that's a political thing. It's a very personal act that everybody has to, well, it has to be committed to by individuals. I'm not going to call for everybody, but that's a little bit too optimistic. But I think I know that we can change the world one person at a time.
Absolutely.
And that's my mission.
Absolutely.
My little corner of the world, anyway.
Yeah. From my interactions with you, you seem so sweet and innocent and just this beaming light. And as I learned about your story and heard more from, our co-organizer, Steve Monahan, I was floored, shocked to see that someone like yourself has a past where you've, engaged in shoplifting and LSD and some really crazy experiences. I would love for you to share a little bit of what led you to dive into such destructive behavior.
Well, I was unhappy. I was an unhappy child. My father was a big figure for me. He was very impressive, but he was also very scary. And I grew up scared of him and scared of being at home and being indoors. So I tried to stay out as much as possible. He wasn't a horrible, brutal man. He did used to hit me. But that's not the point. I don't want to get into complaints about who he was or how he was, but that's basic. That's one of the reasons that I ended up with such self-destructive behavior. Another one is that I didn't feel connected to anything or anyone. Which is maybe not another thing. Maybe it's part of the same sort of syndrome. But I always felt that in order to be safe and secure, I should stay alone. And I always sought my own privacy. And I always dreamed of living in a monastic cell, being isolated from people. And eventually one day I actually got this. And I was quite shocked to find out that I was miserable. I felt lonely. And that was a big eye-opener for me. Because
and when you say you got this, are you referring to the time, where you were in the hut in India, or another time?
When I got this it was sort of quite a bit of time afterwards, I suppose, before all those experiences sort of settled down and made sense to me. At the time, I just knew that I was trying to survive. But I needed, for example, the shoplifting. I didn't need that stuff, and most of it I gave away. I was proving something to myself. I was good at it. I was finally good at something because I did very badly at school. I started developing my mind in the monastery after I left school. That's when I really started studying and learning that I could be intelligent if I wanted to. Before that, I didn't believe in that. And so I settled for this sort of the satisfaction of being a good shoplifter. Well, it makes me cringe to talk about it now. But anyway, that's where I was at.
Yeah.
And then drugs as well, which
Right.
in part, it was the 70s, early 70s, the drug culture was up. But I didn't get into it the same way as other people. For most people, drugs were fun. For me, it was something serious to be explored and investigated, and it was a spiritual path, and which is sort of can be partly true and partly not true as well. But that's basically, if it sounds very meandering and pretty messed up, then I guess I've told it straight.
And what shifted for you?
Support.
Was there a moment? Was there a particular person?
Yeah, there was a person, all right. My wife, Caroline. I left the monastery for all sorts of complicated reasons. I moved to I was in Switzerland at the time. I moved to Canada, and I was lost for a good 15, 16 years. It was a very, very difficult transition. Like, imagine I'd been living in a Tibetan monastery. I'd become a teacher. I was a translator. I was fluent in Tibetan. I had this little world where I had all this respect, and people looked up to me, and I knew my stuff, and I felt clever and knowledgeable and helpful. And then for a whole bunch of reasons, you have to read the book, I just left. And it was a real downer. I didn't have anywhere to turn. I didn't have anyone to relate to. I felt I needed to do it, but I hadn't really thought it through, and it wasn't a very clever thing to do in many ways. Everything I'd built my career on, I left behind. So I sort of went down into quite a dip. And then eventually I met this woman, Caroline, who was actually interested in my story. When I first arrived in Canada, I told one or two people, they said, where you come from, what you do? I told them a little bit about my past. And the reaction was, oh, okay. Like, that's just too weird. And this was true until about the mid-90s, the late 90s, at which point I started noticing people saying, really? That's so interesting. And so I saw this shift in society in general, and that enabled me to open up a bit. So when I met Caroline, and she showed that she was interested in my story, and we started talking about it, and she got excited, and she encouraged me to start teaching. Why are you not teaching? You've been trained to be a teacher. You're all ready to go. And I hadn't felt ready before because I didn't have the experience. But now I felt very ready, especially with that emotional support that she believed in me. She was willing to invest in me, put her time in with me. And I helped with her as well. We married. We're now, happily married couple. More than just a married couple, we're also a business couple. We work together, and we think together, and we talk together, and it's a very close support system. But the changing point was support. Big change for me was, instead of saying the only way I'm going to get any peace in this life is to escape from people, realizing that the only way I'm going to get any peace in this life is to accept the support of people. So that was my changing point.
Wow. So powerful. People, when I look at, the hero's journey and people's stories, so often there's always that guide, that mentor that comes along, that Yoda, to guide us into the light, into the greater version of ourselves. And so glad that your life partner was that for you. Talk to us a little bit about this time period where you spent a year in a rat infested hut in India. That's not something that everyone has experienced, but you have in a year is a long time. So, why were you there, and what was that experience like for you?
Well, I started learning Tibetan in Switzerland. And in Switzerland, we were a small monastery. We were about a dozen people mostly European, a couple of Americans, a couple of Canadians, and 2 Tibetan teachers. So there weren't enough people to talk Tibetan with. And I was getting frustrated because I was studying it year after year after year, and my fluency wasn't increasing at all. So I decided I wanted to go to a Tibetan monastery in India. And I chose Sera Monastery, where there are, at the time, there were 500 monks. Most of them were children. Nowadays, there's more like, I think, between 9,000 and 10,000 monks in Sera Monastery. It's in South India.
Wow.
So when I got there, I was completely surrounded by Tibetan culture. Nobody spoke English. So my Tibetan improved rapidly. It was a great opportunity for me. That's why I went.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also a culture shock. I had lived in India before for 1.5 years already, and I was familiar with poverty and with living at a very low sort of income level. And they just built a new temple with some small rooms around the temple for teachers and special people. And they gave me one of these rooms, but it was right in the center of the monastery. And you got to remember, the monastery is 80% children, boys, and they're playful and they scream and they shout, and there was no peace there at all. And my old introverted instincts, sort of got riled up. So I looked around the monastery to see if, because it's a big ground, it was maybe a couple of acres altogether. So I looked around and I found a storage hut on the very periphery of the grounds where they had stored old wood cuts. For the way they make books is out of these pre-cut slabs of wood. That's a completely different story. But anyway, there was enough room to move, to put stuff up on one side and move a bed into the other side. So I asked around and I got this done and I got my privacy. The door was pretty shaky. The window was not a window. It was just a screen not with fine mesh, but with big holes in. I mean, it would stop a bird flying in, but it didn't stop mosquitoes getting in. The whole area was surrounded by cornfields. And corn, the way corn grows, you got this nice stalk, and then you have a sort of a cup where the leaf is, and the cup fills with a little bit of water, and 2 or 3 little mosquito larvae are growing in each one of those things. So there were the mosquitoes outside, there were the rats inside, and during the monsoon, there was the pig beat. The young monks because the pigs would come out of the jungle and they would literally consume all the corn. They'd lose the whole crop. And this is what they depended on. So the young monks were tasked at that time of year with going out into the crops at night with pots and pans and banging, making noise, and just creating a ruckus to scare the pigs away. So I ended up dealing with all this stuff and living in this rat-infested mosquito. I mean, I was covered in mosquito bites, but the thought of going back into the center of the monastery with all those people, it was too overwhelming for me. I couldn't face it. So I stayed where I was. And in the meantime, I was studying. My Tibetan was improving rapidly. My understanding of the philosophy was improving. I was meditating. I was in the right place at the right time. And these were minor inconveniences for me. I didn't realize what a nasty place it was until I started writing about it 10 years later. And as I put it down on paper, I realized, ew. But when you're there, you're there. You cope with what you've got, right?
Well, what was maybe one lesson that you learned during your time there that would be beneficial to share?
One lesson. No man is an island. John Donne. Yeah, that's it. I realized that I was a product of many different influences, many different forces. And they all came from outside of me. I was inspired by other people. And As much as I was trying to be a good teacher, and inside of me, I suppose I wanted to be important as well. I wanted to be significant. There was a bit of ego. There was a lot of ego in there too. Yeah, that tended to, that really calmed me down. This was good for me. That time was good for me. It really humbled me, because yeah, humility was not really one of my strong suits.
You know, you mentioned the ego, and you know that is a concept that just became more familiar to me this year. You know, I lived in the paradigm of grit, and your work ethic is what accomplishes everything, and had no awareness around the ego, our subconscious beliefs and their effects on things. And you know that changed for me last year around this time.
What
Uh,
happened?
it's a good question. I'm not being interviewed. You're being interviewed.
Yes, you are.
But essentially, I just, you know, they say at the end of man is the beginning of God, is a saying. And it was sort of like that moment for me of just being burnt out, trying to use my willpower to accomplish too much. And it wasn't working. I was tired. I was frustrated. I was working too many hours, and something had to shift. And that's when I had, you know, what I feel like was a second awakening in my life, and started to learn about consciousness and the different things that I'm sure you're versed on. So yeah, that's what shifted for me. Now you made me forget my question. You got off the hook. I had such a good question for you too.
Let me just make a comment on that.
Yeah.
We don't really shift until something smacks us in the side of the face. You know, it's got to hurt.
Yeah.
We're stubborn as hell.
Yeah.
You know, this is my great subject in my life is humans. We're a very funny lot. But it's, yeah, I love learning how quirky we are, and I love learning that we can accept ourselves and we can accept each other, as crazy as it seems, and as angry as we become, and as justified as that anger can be sometimes. We still can accept each other, and we can work together. There are ways to do it. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. You know, TEDx is about ideas worth spreading. We believe that ideas is one of the best ways to impact communities because of the portability of ideas. You know, you think about information and how it travels, and what the internet affords us to do. Well, you know, to pass on an idea is one of the most condensed, potent forms of communication that we can have. It makes it easy to share with others. And when you hear about ideas, what is your idea worth spreading?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I would say, and I'm not trying to be pedantic here, I would say that I have an anti-idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh.
And the theme is, the idea is that our society is pushing us constantly to reach goals, to achieve, to make something, especially money. And, you know, we all know that money is not the point of life, but money has become the point of life, you know, really, for many people in institutions and the society as a whole. And my goal is to get people for a few minutes at a time, perhaps just 1 minute, to sit down and shut up and try to do nothing, try to achieve nothing, and just start to learn what it is to sit for a minute without this need to achieve. Because this force which is driving us to learn and to get more and make more, well, we know it's destroying the planet. And it's just not good for our mental health either. There's nothing wrong with accomplishment. Absolutely not. It's great. But there has to be a counterpoint to it. And that's what we've forgotten. All we focus on is winning and achieving and getting somewhere. Whenever anything bad happens, we think, oh my God, it's a disaster. But the bad things are what teach us.
Right.
That's where we really are, when we're forced to turn around and take a look at ourselves and say, well, what happened?
Right. Excuse me. Yeah. Absolutely. We were forced. Sorry about that. Well, we were forced to take a look at ourselves.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's my idea. I want more people to take a look. I know some people won't. Some people are terrified of silence.
Mm-hmm.
Some people can't just close their eyes and look inside and see what's going on. It's too scary. Or some people say, but my mind is going all over the place, as if it shouldn't be. That's what the mind does.
Mm-hmm.
The human mind, it's an incredible thing. There is nothing more complicated in the universe that anyone knows about anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we've each got one of our own. It's more than magic. I mean, really, it's incredible. You can imagine anything you want. I can tell you to imagine a palm tree on a South Pacific island, and bang, it's right in your mind, right? You can go anywhere you want. You can think whatever you want. You can think bad things too. So we need some guidance in there. We need our values. We need integrity. We need to explore ourselves. And all the emphasis is on factual intelligence and scientific knowledge and achieving measurable goals. But we also have to consider emotional intelligence, because that's where happiness comes from, kindness and our ability to live together. And we talk about all the progress of our civilization, but when you measure the social progress, it's not quite such a straight line anymore.
That's interesting.
We've seen a lot of reverses in the last few years throughout the world, not just in North America. So that's because we're not giving it enough attention. And my goal is to raise that attention level.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for people who struggle with stillness and mindfulness? I'm asking for a friend.
Fine. Illness and mindfulness. Well, you've got to be careful, because mindfulness is not a cure-all. There are conditions in which you shouldn't be practicing mindfulness.
Okay. And which are what? Give us an example.
Well, if you're in any way, if you have any sort of psychosis.
Gotcha.
Even depression, it may make you more depressed. It depends. It may work for you, but it may not. You've got to understand the difference between meditation and mindfulness. Okay, people don't generally have a very clear idea about this.
Okay.
Mindfulness can be a meditation. You can sit down in a quiet room to practice mindfulness, but the real effect of mindfulness is to be out there, is to be with you when you're out there in the world, dealing with people, talking to people. You want a part of yourself knowing what's going on, being able to sort of keep track of your inner motivation. This is what really helps us understand ourselves and change. I don't think I fully answered your question, though.
Any tips on helping support people who struggle with meditation or stillness?
Yeah. So try it by all means. Take a minute, just 1 minute. Sit down with the intention of doing nothing. Don't get upset with this idea of emptying your mind of thoughts. Okay, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. Is not to stop the thoughts. The point is to see what's going on. So when we meditate, we're sitting down in order to feel calm and peaceful and quiet. We want to settle everything down. But mindfulness is different. In mindfulness, we want to sit down and see what's going on. We're not trying to feel good. We're trying to feel everything. Okay. We want to know all the crap that's going on as well, because as we know, that's where we learn stuff. Okay. So mindfulness is more comprehensive, but it's also more demanding. But it takes you much further. It takes you way into yourself, and it enables you to change in very constructive ways. It takes practice.
Definitely practicing. And I've been told to just focusing on the breath. Is that something you encourage people to do? It's like, if they start in meditation, if they start to feel the wandering mind, or I got to go to the bathroom, or whatever the sensation is.
You need an anchor. You need a reference point in meditation, and the breath is the most convenient. It's always there. It's right. It's physical. It's tangible, which means that the breath only happens in the present moment. So it helps not just to keep you focused, but it helps to keep you focused here and now, not in your fantasies or in your memories, but in what's really going on. So it doesn't have to be the breath, but yeah, we usually start with that because it's the most convenient.
What's your take on how this practice of meditation, how does it affect our life? Is it just something that feels good for a moment, or is it something that can ripple effect into our life?
Put very simply, the point of mindfulness is to create a gap between stimulus and response. Okay, we're looking at our reactivity here. So somebody says the wrong thing to me, and I turn around and I say, "You're a jerk." Okay, it's like it just comes out. Okay, it's a learned habit in a sense. I'm going to be defensive and obnoxious, whatever. So before I do that, I want to inject a little bit of space there, so somebody calls me a name, and before I respond, I think about it. I just have that little tiny gap. That's where mindfulness fits in. And as soon as you realize that, and as soon as you use that gap in an objective way, in other words, to say, okay, what's actually going on here? This person insulted me. He's upset. He's got issues. It's got nothing to do with me. Why would I take it personally?
Right.
I'm talking in a perfect world where you actually have time to process all these thoughts. Most of the time, it's just, you're a jerk. We don't step into that reactivity. So this is the basic choice that you get with mindfulness, either reactivity or mindfulness. These are the two options we have in any moment of our lives. Am I going to react, or am I going to put my full conscious thought behind this?
Yeah. It's really good. It's really good. I like how you explained that.
Good.
One of the questions that I like to ask over so often is this one, around what is something about you or your work that people often misunderstand that you would love to clarify? What is it about you or your work that people often misunderstand that you would like to clarify? And while you think of that, I'll tell you why I ask the question every so often to people is because we are overloaded with information. And so many times I encounter people who have a misinterpretation of a title or a term because they read some funky blog or some, propaganda media online. And I think it's really waning and deteriorating and diminishing our ability to be able to connect with one another because we have so many preconceived notions. Even if someone hears about, your experience as a Buddhist monk, they may automatically start to assume and prejudge and something that may have nothing to do with your individual experience or intention around that. So what is one thing that is commonly misunderstood about you or your work that you would like to clarify?
There are quite a few, and I've mentioned the one difference between mindfulness and meditation. That's sort of a big one, but I think probably the biggest of all is the idea that meditation or mindfulness or spiritual practice of any sort is supposed to be transcendent. That it's supposed to take us beyond this world into another world, which is fine. Unlike this dirty old place, that's a perfect place. And that may be true. Maybe there is a heaven, waiting. Maybe there's a place up there for us, for you and me both, Daryl. I hope so. But in the meantime, we're here. Okay. So what can we do here to improve this, where we are with the people that we're with? That to me is the focus of my meditative practice and teaching is to improve this world, this time, this day. And people, it's not that people don't understand that. It's that they want to hang on to this idea of some perfect solution which is waiting at the end. They don't have to work for it. They just have to wait for it. And everything. It's a sort of giving up
Mm.
It's not really, that's an example of a belief which looks like it's a good belief, but I'm not sure. Is it crippling you or is it empowering you?
Mm. It's a great question
And
to ask.
that depends on how you hold that belief.
It's true. That's true. I think that's great. Is it
Mm,
crippling you or is it empowering you?
mm,
Is a great litmus test for that.
mm,
One of our former guests, Ken Thompson, says good explanation on how mindfulness can be beneficial within guidelines. I think that's good. Thank you for that comment, Ken. My wife Brittany says, "Wow, to go from isolating to the only way to get peace in this life is to accept support." Was just one of the many nuggets you shared that I also thought was beautifully stated and explained through story as well. So yeah, any as we start to kind of land the plane here, any final thoughts you want to begin to share with the audience around things that can improve their life or things you just want the world to know?
You can improve your life and this world more than you know. And you don't have to come to someone like me to find out how. You just have to stop and look inside yourself and you'll find out how.
Mm, mm.
You've got
So
to do
good.
it consistently, and you've got to do it with integrity and with honesty. And you've got to you need courage. It's not easy. You need persistence. You need a lot of stuff. It's not easy, a good life. It's hard work and it's good work. It's not a complicated message,
Mhm, mhm.
but not many people really like it
Why do you feel that is?
because it's demanding. People are busy. They're just trying to make ends meet. They're not even succeeding nowadays. A lot of people are having trouble with that.
Mhm,
They're trying to keep their head above water financially, never mind emotionally and spiritually. I mean, that's the last thing on their mind. They don't have time. There's too much pressure. So the first thing is for those of us who can is to make society a little bit more of an accepting and understanding and supportive place. And then those people will gradually find the time to be more introspective and to think
mm.
about their lives. And that's what I believe.
Wow. Super powerful. Stephen, thank you so much. You are such a wealth of wisdom. If people are interested in connecting with you, how can they get a hold of you?
The easiest way is to go to my website. Go to mindfulnesslive.ca. That's the page for my weekly teaching. I teach 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, ongoing. But that also is embedded in my bigger website, schettini.com, where you can find out more about my history, my story, some of my teachings, recordings. There's
See
also
that picture of your dad taming lions? I saw that. That was pretty cool. That's
yeah,
pretty cool. Pretty
yeah.
cool.
There's some good stories on there. Yeah, it's some people like reading that stuff. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
a
yeah,
wri-
yeah.
I'm a writer too. I mean, writing is one of my great loves.
I can tell. I can
Yeah,
tell. I thought it was very well written. I was just immersed in the story. Usually,
good.
you have to be a good writer to keep me reading on long form content, and you
Mm,
definitely accomplished that. And it
mm,
was intriguing to listen, and I love the images as well as they enhance the story. So, I can tell you're a great storyteller and a great writer. So,
oh,
thank you for serving others and expressing yourself. I know you're making a huge impact in the world. Guys, thank you so much. Make sure you show Steven some love in the comments. Feel free to reach out and connect with him. I always tell people that the main event is about ideas worth spreading, and this live stream is about people worth sharing. And so we just want to share great people with you. And he is one of those people. So feel free to connect with him. And if you haven't connected with us at TEDxAlexanderPark.com, make sure you do. People keep asking, are you still accepting speaker applications? And we are. There's not a lot of spots left, but we are still accepting applications as we finalize the lineup. And then also there's additional opportunities to be involved. This live stream is a way. There's volunteer opportunities. You can open up a conversation about becoming a donor or patron or a sponsor. And there's just many ways to be involved. So we desire for this to be a staple within our community. There's a lot of excitement and a lot of buzz of people really excited to hear what people have to say. So make sure you connect with us. I'll put that website here, TEDxAlexanderPark.com. And always remember that great communities flourish when elders plant seeds beneath trees they know they never sit under. Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.